Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Samuel Croft woke up that Tuesday just like any other day in the past 24 years of marriage. The routine was a fortress. Coffee at 6 a.m., the soft gurgle of the machine a familiar and reassuring sound in the quiet Denver dawn, a quick, practiced kiss for Helen before she left for her shift. She was 50 now, the head of patient relations at St. Joseph's Hospital, a position she carried with an air of professional grace that Samuel had always admired. Then, it was the 40-minute drive, predictable down to the traffic lights, to the logistics firm where he managed the intricate dance of shipping and receiving. At 52, Samuel was a man who found profound comfort in stability. In his world, systems worked. Schedules were met, numbers didn't lie, spreadsheets didn't betray. His marriage to Helen had always seemed to operate on the same flawless logic. It was solid, reliable, a partnership built on decades of mutual understanding and respect. It was the central, perfectly balanced column in the ledger of his life. But in recent weeks, something had changed. Small inconsistencies had started to appear. They were like rounding errors in a column of data that refused to balance, tiny discrepancies that a less meticulous man might have missed. But Samuel's mind was trained to spot patterns, to notice the slightest deviation from the norm. It began with a scent. Helen came home one evening smelling of a different perfume. It wasn't her usual light, floral scent, the one he saw her apply sparingly each morning. This was richer, sweeter, something for the evening. When he'd mentioned it, she'd waved a dismissive hand. Oh, a new air freshener in the office. It's overpowering, isn't it? Samuel had accepted the explanation. It was logical enough. Then came the extra shifts. Helen had always shared her work schedule, pinning it to the corkboard in the kitchen. But lately, she'd begun picking up shifts that weren't on the official rota. Last-minute emergency, she would text. A colleague called in sick. Samuel understood. Her job was demanding, but it was happening with increasing frequency, disrupting their quiet evenings, their shared dinners. The most jarring inconsistency, however, was the phone. She had started guarding it with a quiet intensity he'd never seen before. She would be sitting on the sofa, the low light of the screen illuminating a soft, private smile on her face, a smile he hadn't seen directed at him in a long time. Whenever he walked into the room, she would quickly turn the screen away or lock it, the motion swift and reflexive. Just hospital gossip, she'd say, laughing it off. You wouldn't be interested. He tried to ignore it. He tried to choke it down, telling himself it was paranoia, or perhaps the byproduct of his own stress at work. Helen was a good woman. She was his wife. 24 years wasn't a number, it was a testament. It was a shared history of mortgages paid, of a daughter raised, of sickness and health. But men who work with logistics know how to spot a pattern. They know when a shipment is off schedule, when a delivery is unaccounted for. And this pattern screamed inconsistency. He sat in his office now, the city of Denver sprawling below his window. He was staring at a complex shipping manifest, a web of destinations and deadlines that he could normally navigate with his eyes closed. Today, the neat columns and rows blurred before him. They seemed to mock him, their perfect order a stark contrast to the burgeoning chaos in his mind. He wasn't a jealous man. He had never been. He trusted Helen, but trust, he was beginning to realize, was also a system. And for the first time in 24 years, his system was showing signs of a critical failure. The foundation of his fortress, the one he had believed to be unshakable, was starting to show the faintest, invisible fractures. And he was terrified to find out how deep they went. Samuel didn't confront her. Not yet. His instinct, honed by years of managing complex problems, was not to charge in with accusations. A direct question, he reasoned, would only be met with a well-rehearsed denial, another piece of faulty data designed to placate him. No, before he acted, he needed to understand the scope of the problem. He needed to gather more information. He became a quiet observer in his own home. He didn't spy. He simply paid attention. He started making mental notes of the frequency of her late nights. Tuesday, then Friday, then the following Monday. The excuses were always plausible, always related to her demanding job, a grieving family needing consolation, a VIP donor requiring a private tour, a staffing crisis on the oncology ward. Each one, on its own, was perfectly reasonable, but together, They formed a narrative that felt increasingly constructed. The emotional distance between them grew, a silent, cold expanse in the spaces they used to share. Their conversations became transactional, stripped of the easy intimacy that had once defined them. "Did you remember to call the plumber about the leak?" she'd ask, scrolling through her phone. "Chloe called," he'd say, looking at the back of her head. "She needs money for her law school textbooks." He felt a profound sense of unease settle over him, a low-grade anxiety that hummed beneath the surface of his days. He started to question himself. Had he become boring, predictable? Had he let the comfortable rhythm of their life lull him into a state of neglect? He was a good provider, a loyal husband. He had supported her career, celebrated her promotions, held her when her father passed away. He had been present, hadn't he? Or had he been present in body, but absent in spirit, lost in the predictable world of his ledgers and schedules? The insecurity gnawed at him, a bitter counterpoint to his growing suspicion. Maybe this was his fault. The tipping point arrived on another Tuesday afternoon. He was in the middle of a conference call, negotiating freight rates, when his phone buzzed. A text from Helen: "Emergency in the ICU. A terrible pileup on the I-25. I'll be home very late. Don't wait up. Love you." Samuel stared at the message. His stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. Something was wrong with the wording. It felt performative, too detailed, an amateur liar's mistake, providing more information than necessary. Emergency in the ICU. A terrible pileup on the I-25. It was a script. He finished the conference call on autopilot, his voice steady while his mind raced. He sat at his desk for a full hour after everyone else had left for the day, the office quiet and dark around him. He stared out at the city lights, but he didn't see them. He was locked in a fierce internal debate. One voice, the voice of 24 years of shared history, urged him to trust her. "You're being paranoid. You're insulting the woman you love. This is what stress does. It makes you see ghosts." But another voice, the cold, logical voice of the man who managed systems, was louder. "The pattern doesn't lie. The data points are consistent. A system that behaves this erratically is hiding a critical flaw." He couldn't live in this gray area of doubt any longer. The uncertainty was worse than any potential truth. He needed a fact. A single, undeniable data point that would either confirm his fears or expose them as foolish paranoia. He unlocked his phone, his thumb hovering over his contacts. He scrolled down to the main switchboard number for St. Joseph's Hospital, a number he knew by heart. He was about to cross a line. He knew it. The moment he made this call, he was no longer a trusting husband. He was an investigator, and there was no coming back. He took a deep breath, the sterile, recycled air of the office filling his lungs, and he pressed the call button. The voice on the other end of the line was polite and efficient. "St. Joseph's Hospital. How may I direct your call?" "Hello," Samuel said, his own voice sounding distant, unfamiliar. "I was hoping to speak with Helen Croft. She's the head of patient relations." "One moment, sir, let me check for you." The silence that followed was immense. It stretched for an eternity, filled only by the frantic thumping of his own heart. He could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. He imagined the receptionist scrolling through schedules, through on-call lists. In that moment, he prayed he was wrong. He prayed he was a fool, a paranoid husband who was about to make a terrible mistake. Then the voice returned, as cheerful and detached as before. "I'm sorry, sir. Helen Croft is not scheduled to work today. Is there a message I can take for her?" Samuel's world didn't explode. It simply collapsed. It folded in on itself in absolute silence, the way a building implodes, leaving nothing but dust and a hollow space where something solid used to be. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "She said she was on call. Let me double check." Another pause, shorter this time. "No, sir. I have the full schedule right here. She isn't in the hospital today. My apologies." "No. Thank you," he managed to say, before ending the call. His hand was trembling as he placed the phone back on his desk. The computer screen in front of him blurred. A wave of anger, hot and suffocating, washed over him, so intense it made him dizzy, but it was followed, almost immediately, by an icy, terrifying clarity. He wasn't going to wait. He wasn't going to collect more evidence or prolong the agony. He wasn't going to play the fool anymore. If Helen was lying, he would find out where she was. Right now, his mind, sharp and analytical even in its grief, latched onto a memory. The car tracker. They had installed it on both their cars months earlier after a string of break-ins in their neighborhood, a security measure they had both agreed upon. An electronic safety net. He opened the app on his phone, his fingers still slightly unsteady. He entered the password. A map of Denver appeared on the screen. And there it was, a small, pulsating blue dot showing the location of Helen's car. It was stationary. It was parked at a residential complex about 15 minutes away. Oak Ridge Commons. A place he'd never heard of. He scrolled through his mental database of their friends, their acquaintances. No one lived there. Helen knew no one who lived there. He grabbed his car keys. He sent a curt email to his boss, citing a sudden family emergency. He walked out of the office, his face a stony mask. The evening traffic seemed to conspire against him. Every red light felt like an eternity, a deliberate act of torture. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. He felt like a financial auditor on his way to uncover a massive fraud. This was no longer about emotion. This was about confirming the truth. He finally reached the complex. It was a collection of generic, three-story buildings. He spotted Helen's dark blue sedan parked near one of them. He pulled his own car to a stop at a safe distance, under the cover of a large oak tree, turned off the engine, and waited. The cold logic of his profession took over. He needed visual proof. Something undeniable. Something he could hold in his hand. Half an hour dragged by like half a lifetime. The sky deepened from dusk to a dark, inky blue. He watched the windows of the building opposite him. People were making dinner, watching television, living their normal, predictable lives. Then, the door of a ground-floor apartment opened. Apartment 2B. A pool of light spilled onto the walkway, and Helen stepped out. She was laughing. A light, carefree sound that twisted something sharp in Samuel's gut. She was adjusting her blouse, her hair slightly tousled. She was followed by a man, younger, probably in his 30s, with the kind of gym-sculpted physique that spoke of hours spent lifting weights. The man said something Samuel couldn't hear, and Helen playfully swatted his arm. It was a gesture of teasing, casual intimacy that was more damning than a kiss. Bile rose in Samuel's throat, but his hand was steady as he raised his phone. The screen's glow felt obscene in the darkness of his car. He took a photo, and another, and another. He documented it all. Helen getting into her car. The man waving from the doorway of 2B. Her, blowing a kiss back to him before starting the engine. Each press of the button was a physical blow, a confirmation of the ultimate betrayal. But it was also ammunition. He waited until her taillights disappeared down the street. Then, he got out of his car, walked quickly across the parking lot, and noted the apartment number, 2B. He took a deep breath, swallowing the fury that threatened to explode from his chest, and headed home. The confrontation would not happen here. It would not happen in front of her lover's apartment. It would happen on his turf, on his terms. The drive home was a study in controlled rage. Samuel's mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and pain, but his actions were deliberate, methodical. He was a man preparing for a hostile takeover of his own life. This wouldn't be a screaming match. It would be a clinical extraction of the truth. He got home before Helen, the familiar silence of the house feeling heavy, accusatory. He walked through the downstairs rooms, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. He turned off every single light in the living room, plunging it into near-total darkness, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the large bay window. He sat on the couch, the one they had picked out together years ago, and waited. The only illumination came from the screen of his phone as he cycled through the photos he had just taken. Helen laughing. The man at the door. The blown kiss. Each image was a fresh stab to his heart, but he forced himself to look, to burn them into his memory. This was his evidence. This was his reality now. At 11 p.m., he heard the key turn in the lock. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silent house. The front door opened and closed. He heard Helen drop her purse on the console table in the hall, followed by a heavy sigh. A sigh of performative exhaustion that Samuel now recognized as a complete and utter fraud. She entered the dark living room, her silhouette framed by the light from the hallway. He could see her frown. "Sam?" she called out, her voice uncertain. "You in here? Why are all the lights off?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached over and flipped on the switch of the lamp beside him. The room was instantly flooded with a harsh, bright light. Helen blinked, her hand flying up to shield her eyes as they adjusted. When her vision cleared, she saw him. He was sitting rigidly on the couch, his face completely devoid of expression, his eyes cold and hard as stone. A flicker of confusion, then alarm, crossed her face. "How was work?" Samuel asked. His voice was icy. Each syllable was sharp, precise, like a scalpel. Helen hesitated. It was only for a split second, but in that fractional pause, Samuel saw everything. He saw the mental scramble for the right lie, the dawning realization that something was terribly wrong. Exhausting, she finally said, forcing a weary smile. It was a tough shift. Why are you sitting in the dark?" Samuel stood up slowly, every movement measured. "Because I called the hospital today, Helen." He took a step toward her. He saw the color drain from her face. "I asked for you," he continued, his voice relentlessly calm. "They said you weren't scheduled." He took another step. She instinctively backed away. "And because I was at Oak Ridge Commons," he said, the name of the complex dropping into the silent room like a stone. "I saw you come out of apartment 2B. I saw you, with him." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Words failed her. The carefully constructed world of her lies had just been demolished in a few simple sentences. "Samuel, I can explain," she finally stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "It's not what you think." "Don't," he cut her off, his voice rising for the first time, laced with a dangerous edge. "Don't make me out to be a fool. Don't insult our history by trying to convince me this is innocent." He raised his phone, the screen glowing brightly between them. He showed her the photos. Her laughing, adjusting her clothes. The man at the door. The kiss. Denial was impossible. Her face crumbled. Tears began to well in her eyes. "You owe me honesty," he said, his voice dropping back to that chilling calm. "Now, at the very least." She tried to move closer, to reach for him, but he stepped back as if her touch would burn him. She began to cry, words tumbling out in fragmented, desperate excuses. He was just a friend, a colleague. They were reviewing some difficult patient files. He was helping her with a stressful case, but her own voice betrayed the lie. It was weak, desperate, pathetic. Samuel just shook his head slowly. "Reviewing files? At 10 o'clock at night? In a private apartment, with you dressed up, laughing like that?" He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Helen, I'm a logistics manager. I recognize inconsistencies for a living, and for weeks, you have been one walking, talking inconsistency." She collapsed onto the couch, the same couch where he had just been sitting, and covered her face with her hands. Between sobs, the truth finally started to leak out. His name was Leo, a personal trainer from the hospital gym. They'd met 3 months ago. It started with conversations, then coffee, then, she couldn't finish the sentence. Samuel finished it for her, his voice dripping with contempt. "Then you decided that 24 years of marriage were worth less than some guy with a six-pack." She lifted her tear-streaked face, a flash of defiance in her red-rimmed eyes. "You don't understand, Sam. I felt invisible. You live in your office, in your numbers, your spreadsheets. When was the last time you really saw me?" The anger that Samuel had held in check all night finally broke loose. But it didn't come out in shouts. It came out in sharp, precise words, each one a perfectly aimed blow. "Invisible?" he repeated, his voice shaking with a quiet fury. "I held you for 3 straight days when your mother died. I stayed up all night with you while you cried over a promotion you didn't get. I paid for your graduate degree when we barely had enough money to cover the mortgage. I supported you when you wanted to become head of relations, even though it meant we had less time together. I saw you, Helen. I saw all of it." He took a step closer, looming over her. "But sure, Leo has time for the gym. I've got bills to pay and a life to manage. Our life. How convenient for you to feel invisible." She reached for his arm, her touch pleading. "Sam, please." He pulled away violently. "Don't touch me," he snarled. "You lost that right." He turned and grabbed his car keys from the bowl by the door. "I'm sleeping at a hotel. Tomorrow, I'm calling a lawyer." He was at the door when he turned back to look at her, a broken figure on their couch. "And Helen," he said, his voice now flat, devoid of all emotion, "if you have an ounce of decency left in you, you'll tell Chloe yourself. Because if I have to tell her, I won't leave anything out." He walked out the door, closing it softly behind him, leaving the ruins of his marriage in the brightly lit living room. The hotel room was sterile and impersonal. The air smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and someone else's fleeting presence. Samuel lay on his back on the unfamiliar bed, fully clothed, staring at the textured white ceiling. He didn't cry. He couldn't. The emotions were too vast, too overwhelming. It was like standing before a tidal wave. There was nothing to do but be still and let it pass over you. Instead, his mind, seeking refuge in its natural state, began to create lists. 1. Call a lawyer. Robert Vance, a divorce attorney a colleague had casually recommended years ago during his own messy split. 2. Find a short-term rental apartment. 3. Separate the finances. 4. Go home and pack a suitcase. 5. Tell Chloe. That last item sat at the bottom of the list like a lead weight. The next morning, he moved with the numb efficiency of a machine. He called Robert Vance at 9 a.m. sharp. The lawyer was direct, his voice calm and professional. Samuel explained the situation with the same detached clarity he would use to report a critical shipping delay. He had photographic evidence. He had the documented lie about the work shift. He had a history of inconsistent behavior. You have a very strong case, Mr. Croft, Vance said. We can file immediately. Throughout the day, his phone vibrated incessantly. 17 missed calls from Helen. A long string of text messages. He saw the previews on his lock screen. Sam, please, we need to talk. This was a terrible mistake. Don't throw us away. He deleted every single message without reading it fully. He blocked her number. For him, the conversation was over. There was nothing left to say. Explanations were just another form of lies. That evening, he braced himself for the hardest task. He called his daughter. Chloe was in her second year of law school at the University of Colorado Boulder. She was focused, intelligent, so much like him in her logical way of thinking. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and full of life. Hey, Dad, what's up? Samuel took a breath. He tried to keep his voice steady, to present the information like a factual report, to shield her from the raw emotion churning inside him. Chloe, I have something difficult to tell you, he began. Your mother and we're getting a divorce. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He could hear her breathing. What? Why? Did you two have a fight? It's more complicated than that, he said, and for the first time, he felt his own throat tighten, the carefully constructed dam of his composure beginning to crack. Your mother, she's been having an affair. I found out last night. The marriage is over. The silence that followed was heavier, filled with a dawning horror. When she finally spoke, her voice was a broken whisper. Mom, cheated on you? She asked, the words sounding alien, impossible. But, you two were always so solid. I thought you were different. I thought so, too, sweetheart, Samuel replied, and that's when the first tear he hadn't allowed himself to shed finally escaped, tracing a hot, silent path down his cheek. Chloe cut off contact with Helen for weeks. She didn't answer her mother's frantic calls or desperate messages. Betrayal, Samuel realized, was a shockwave. His discovery was the epicenter, but the destructive energy radiated outward, damaging everything in its path. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had broken his daughter's image of the family she had always believed in. The news began to leak out, as it always does. He didn't need to spread it himself. A close colleague of Helen's at the hospital, a woman who was also a friend of theirs, asked him directly why he was looking for an apartment on his own. Samuel didn't lie. He told her the simple, unvarnished truth. From there, the gossip spread through the hospital corridors like a virus. The respected head of patient relations, married for decades, caught having an affair with a young personal trainer from the gym. The story was too juicy, too scandalous to remain contained. Samuel didn't take any pleasure in it. But he also refused to protect Helen's reputation at the cost of his own dignity. She had written this story. She would have to live with the consequences. He spent the next few weeks in a daze, moving his things into a small, furnished apartment near his office. Each box he packed was filled with the ghosts of his former life. Photographs, old anniversary cards, shared souvenirs from vacations. He was dismantling a museum of a life that no longer existed. The shockwave was still expanding. The full extent of the damage was yet to be seen. But as he sat alone in his new, empty apartment, surrounded by boxes, he knew one thing for certain. The life he had known was gone forever. A year can change everything. A year after the divorce was finalized, Samuel sat in his new apartment. It was smaller than the house he had shared with Helen, but it was his. Practical, orderly, everything had its place. From his window, he could see the lights of downtown Denver, a steady, glittering constellation. He was no longer just surviving. He was rebuilding. The process had been slow, arduous. He had started therapy, something he had always resisted, viewing it as an admission of weakness. But he now recognized it as essential maintenance for a system under severe stress. He learned to articulate his anger, his grief, the profound sense of betrayal that had hollowed him out. He rejoined a gym, not to impress anyone, but because he needed a healthy outlet for the anger that still surfaced on quiet nights. He rediscovered old hobbies. He picked up the guitar again, his fingers fumbling at first on the strings, but slowly rediscovering the chords he hadn't played since college. His bond with Chloe, paradoxically, had deepened. The shared trauma had forged a new kind of honesty between them. He visited her in Boulder on weekends. They'd go for hikes, talk for hours. He saw the strength and resilience in his daughter, and felt a surge of pride that was a balm to his wounded soul. She had eventually started speaking to her mother again, but the conversations were strained, cautious. The easy warmth was gone, replaced by a permanent, guarded distance. He had run into Helen once, about 6 months after the papers were signed. It was in a supermarket parking lot. She was leaving with just a few bags, looking tired. Her once meticulously dyed hair was showing streaks of gray at the roots. Their eyes met for a brief, awkward moment. Her mouth opened as if to say something, but Samuel just gave a polite, distant nod and walked to his car. There was nothing left to say. He felt a flicker of distant pity, but no anger, and more importantly, no regret. The divorce itself had moved relatively quickly. Assets were divided fairly. Samuel hadn't wanted to drag it out. He wanted closure. He wanted to heal. He learned through the grapevine what had happened to her. Her reputation at the hospital was permanently tarnished. The whispers never completely died down. Leo, the personal trainer, had vanished the moment things became complicated, sending a cold text before blocking her number. She had traded a 24-year partnership for a fleeting affair with a man who abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. The irony was devastating. Tonight, Samuel was not alone in his apartment. Across the small dining table sat Sarah, a divorced colleague from the office. They had started seeing each other a few months ago. It was slow, easy. There was no pressure, just honest conversation and comfortable companionship. She had a sharp sense of humor and, as she put it, a zero-tolerance policy for lies. Samuel appreciated that more than any other trait. "Have you really moved on?" she asked him gently, her eyes searching his. "From what happened with your ex?" Samuel thought for a moment before answering, swirling the wine in his glass. "Moving on isn't about forgetting," he said, the words coming to him with a clarity that surprised even himself. "It's about learning to carry it without letting it break you. I've learned that. The ledger of your life will always have debits and credits. You can't erase them. You can only try to balance the books going forward." And it was true. He had learned so much in the wreckage of his old life. He'd learned that loyalty isn't weakness, and that stability isn't boredom. He'd learned that predictability in love is really just another word for reliability. He'd learned that facing pain head-on, even when it feels impossible, is the only way to get to the other side whole. His victory wasn't in Helen's downfall. Revenge wasn't what he had sought when he chose to tell the truth. What he wanted was a simple, honest accounting, for reality to be known, for him not to be painted as the cold, distant husband in a story where he was the victim. And in that, he had won. But the real victory, he realized with the quiet wisdom of time, wasn't about her at all. It was about rebuilding himself. It was looking in the mirror and recognizing the man he saw, someone who didn't lower his head, who didn't settle for less than he deserved, who had the courage to amputate something that was already dead, even when it hurt. The last time Chloe visited, they had been sorting through old boxes of photos to digitize them. She held up a picture from her parents' wedding. They were young, smiling, a whole future ahead of them. "Do you think she was always like this?" Chloe had asked softly. "Capable of it?" Samuel studied the photo of the young woman who had been his wife. "I think people change," he said after a long moment. "Or maybe they just reveal who they always were when they think no one's watching. I don't know, sweetheart." And in the end, It doesn't matter anymore. He looked at his daughter, his brilliant, strong daughter. What matters is that I'm not going to waste any more time trying to understand why she did it. She did it. It's over, and we move on. Chloe put the photo back in the box. I'm proud of you, Dad, she said, of how you handled everything. Vincent felt his eyes sting slightly, but he smiled. A real smile. I just did what needed to be done. It was that simplicity, that clarity, that had kept him whole. Samuel Croft had lost a marriage. He had lost the woman he thought he knew, but he had regained something far more valuable, self-respect, and unlike the marriage, no one could ever take that from him again. The final balance sheet of his life, he knew, was once again in order, and he was the one who held the pen. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.